All right, I know that the Chad Daybell case is messy and convoluted and can be so confusing. I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say, okay, give me the nutshell version of this case. And I'm like, oh, I will try. And then as I try to explain, they go, well, what about this? And I'm like, oh, that's a rabbit hole. You want to go that direction? It's confusing. So I have put together a timeline, and I swear this is abbreviated. I could go into so much more detail about so many other things, and people who are in the know about this case will go, oh, you left this out, you left that out. Yeah, I did. And it's still longer than you might imagine. There's so many players and so many events and so much. That's what this video is. If you want just kind of a big like overview of what happened when, please help me understand. That's what this is. If you know someone who is interested in the case and doesn't even know where to begin, this is a good place to start, as well as my video about the main players of the Daybell and Valo Cox groups. Those are good places to start, as well as my Chad Daybell playlist. Yes, the audio on the Chad one has some wonky things going with it. Technical difficulties are always fun, especially when you're starting a new channel. But yes, so that's what we're going to do in this video. Basic overview of the timeline. Welcome to True Crime, Faith, and Chocolate. I am your host, Annette Lyon, USA Today best-selling author of the suspense novel Just One More and a whole bunch of other stuff, as well as a true crime junkie and a woman of faith. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, supposedly the same faith that Chad and Lori purport to believe in, but yeah, right. No. So here we are discussing religion and true crime, where they intersect, and currently where they intersect with my faith. Alas. Here is our timeline. Starting out, the whole mess begins officially October of 2018. End of that month is when Chad and Lori officially met in person. Many of us suspect that they met before that, or at least online, that they were communicating online. We know that Lori met Chad already as a fan because she had read some of his gaggy books, and by the end of that first day, he had told her they were married in a past life, and they were already smitten and started their affair pretty quickly. So that's a little quick. If someone were to just approach you and say, oh, you know what? We were married in a past life. Okay. So that seems odd that she would have just jumped at that unless they had already had some kind of prior communications. That's my thought. Let's move that a little up. So just for simplicity's sake. Okay. So a few weeks later, clearly after they've been communicating for some time, online phone calls, and I believe they've seen each other at least one other time, they meet together. I believe it's in Arizona at this point. Chad's in Rexburg. She's in Arizona, so they have all of Utah between them. So they're meeting up in various places, and they seal themselves in the temple, which would be like a marriage ceremony. I can guarantee it wasn't a legitimate marriage ceremony. There would not have been an officiator to do that. Absolutely not. Most likely, they either slipped into a sealing room and then pretended that Jesus was there, which they said Jesus sealed them or whatever, or they were doing proxy work. You can bring, names of your deceased ancestors who didn't get a chance to be sealed in this life, and then they can be sealed in proxy. And if they want to accept that sealing in the next life, they have the choice to accept the ordinance or not. So proxy work. I suspect they were doing proxy work, and it's frowned upon to be doing proxy work if it's a sealing if you're not married to each other, because, not that it's necessarily a bad thing, but when you're feeling spiritual things, sometimes that can be misunderstood as romance. So so they were probably pretending to those around that they were actually married, and they were not, and then imagined as they're doing the sealing that there was actually a spiritual thing and they actually were being married as well, which is ridiculous. A couple months later, Lori threatens Charles, says, you are a zombie and I'm going to kill you. You are a zombie named Ned Schneider, no less. So at this point, Lori also starts to move money out of Charles's business accounts. And when he goes on a business trip, she goes to the airport, takes his truck away, so when he gets home, it's not at the airport anymore. And then she locks him out of the house, throws away his clothes. When he gets back on January 31st, he's like, what is going on? My truck isn't at the airport. It's been stolen, he thinks. Can't get into the house. His key doesn't work. He finally calls the police, and he's like, look, something is up with my wife. Something is deeply wrong. And the police are like, well, can't really do much about it at this point. He wants a mental health hold on her, and he's telling them that that she's threatening my life, and they aren't taking her seriously, unfortunately. But February 4th, Charles does manage to get a protective order against her. It doesn't last very long, I don't believe, but a few weeks after that, he gets his life insurance policy changed so that the beneficiary is his sister Kay. You may recall that Kay is the biological grandmother of little JJ, whom Charles and Lori adopted because his biological parents couldn't take care of him, special needs, and they had some drug issues and whatnot. And Kay felt that she and her husband Larry weren't really up to the task they loved him, and they were involved in his life forever until he was no longer with us. But Charles thought something is going on with Lori, and if something happens to him, he wanted to be sure that JJ would be taken care of, so he changed the beneficiary to Kay, so that Kay could take care of JJ. A couple weeks after that, we're into March of 2019 now. Lori visits Chad in Idaho. Sometime that month as well, we end up with Charles emailing Lori, and because Lori has actually gone off to Hawaii and various trips, and he's like, look, JJ and I haven't seen you in 49 days. What's going on? About the same time, Lori and Chad come from Idaho, where they had their little tryst up there. So Lori tells someone that Ned is gone, but then another demon has taken his place. Later, that demon is named Iplos, spelled with an H, but the H is silent. So sometime around then, in the spring, we don't know exact dates, Tylee is a zombie named Hillary. And Lori, at this point, she returns to Charles and tries to make amends, we think, because she wanted to be sure the life insurance money was going to her, because she suspected it was going to Kay. It does appear that at some point he did change it back to Lori, and then he flipped it back to Kay without Lori knowing. Dates on that are fuzzy as far as I've been able to find. But Lori, yeah, she's trying to make sure that she's not divorced when Charles dies, because she wants his life insurance money. Because this whole case, a lot of it comes down to Lori and Chad being together and having money to just do whatever they want. Chad and Lori have been together lots of times now, carrying out their affair. It sounds like when they first started kind of carrying on this affair, it was emotional to a point, physical, but not all the way, if that makes sense. Almost that they were like, well, we're not officially married yet, so let's basically do everything but. Sounds like that only lasted until they were quote-unquote fake sealed married, because then they're like, oh, now it's official, we're married and spiritually, so it's okay if we cheat on our spouses because we're married as well, whatever. They fly down, Chad flies down to Houston, where Lori is trying to make amends with Charles, and they have a tryst down there. And as far as Tammy is concerned, he thinks that he is speaking at a girls' camp. I do wonder why she would have believed that, because a girls' camp is in the summer. I have never heard of a girls' camp in the spring, but okay. In June, we don't know the date, so the latter half, I believe, Melanie Boudreau, who is the niece of Lori, but kind of a daughter figure to Lori, files for divorce from her husband, Brandon, of many years. They have 3 or 4 children together, I believe, and she has drunk the Kool-Aid. So she tries to get Brandon killed later on, but that's in a few months. Lori moves to Arizona, officially, into the home where Charles is later killed, and then 5 days later, Charles confronts Lori about the email she's been sending, supposedly under his name, and he's like, I know about Chad. I know that his wife is named Tammy, and I'm going to email her, and I'm going to text her. I'm going to visit her and blow this all up. And Lori's like, oh, well, Tammy's my friend, blah, blah, blah. Right about this time, Adam, Lori's other brother, is going, something is really off here. This is not cool. Mom and Dad, there's more here than Lori just wanting to be righteous and reading the scriptures and going to the temple all the time. So he is trying to talk to Charles, who Lori has tried to cut off from the family. Charles has tried to reach out to the family, and they've largely cut him off because Lori told him that we're having fights and Charles is a jerk. And Charles is the one cheating. Cute. Adam flies in, and he and Charles are trying to come up with something to kind of wake Lori up. And maybe meet with the stake president, which is the larger geographical area. Like a stake president would be over several wards. A ward is a geographical congregation. And stake president could take away her temple recommend. If they were to say she's having an affair, that would be grounds for excommunication even. Definitely would mean taking away the temple recommend, and she couldn't get into the temple again after that. But she gets wind that Alex is in town and planning something with Charles. So she expedites the plan, gets Alex over to her house overnight, which is odd because he just lives down the street or a few minutes away. Why on earth would he spend the night at her house? That's odd. But he does, and then in the morning before the kids go to school, Alex shoots Charles, claims that it's self-defense. Lori conveniently leaves the house with Tylee and JJ so fast that they don't even have shoes on. She has to stop at a Walgreens to buy flip-flops. She gets some Burger King to get some food for JJ. And at some point, then Alex calls 911, says that he killed his brother-in-law in self-defense, which is such a load of crap. And later on, Zulema, may have heard of her. Eventually, down the road, he marries Zulema because Chad told them to get married. But she comes to him and says, are you okay? After she learns that he shot Charles. And he goes, yeah, why wouldn't I be? And she says, well, you just shot someone. He says, no, I didn't. I shot a zombie. I'm fine. Which is just bizarre. 3 days after Alex kills Charles, Chad begins texting the quote-unquote romance novel, which is nasty. It's icky. And for anyone seriously thinking that Chad might have actually been trying to write a romance novel, aside from the fact that it's crap, because his other books are crap too, I gotta explain that the LDS market's very conservative, and the stuff he's including in this romance novel would not have flown remotely. Like, it would have. So unless he was planning on starting an entirely new career with a whole bunch of brand new readers, which someone with his ego would not do, no, he was not intending to publish this. Nope. Suddenly, JJ Service Dog is deemed a zombie. So that's cute. So then Lori texts Chad that, oh crap, Charles's life insurance beneficiary has been changed to Kay. And then she places an ad to sell JJ's dog. The next day, JJ FaceTimes with his grandparents, Kay and Larry. It turns out it will be the last time they ever see him. The call lasts a matter of seconds before he is forced to hang up, and it's a weird conversation, even as short as it was. And from that point on, Kay is trying to have phone calls like they've always had, and Lori just keeps pushing it off. The next day, Lori gets mad at Chad for spending time with his family and kind of threatens to break up with him. And then Chad replies with things like, oh, I love you so much, and but you know what? You've done these things, and now I can't protect you, and your angelic protections are gone because you're mad at me. And it's just the most ridiculous, passive-aggressive, manipulative crap between both of them. 5 days after that, Tylee's Social Security benefits that she gets as the surviving child of Joe suddenly are being deposited into Lori's account instead of Tylee's. Tylee at this point is still alive, but she no longer has access to her own money. And actually, an FBI agent on the stand specifically said that Tylee was always very responsible with her money. And so there was no reason for the money to suddenly be in Lori's hands, except if Lori wanted it for herself. September of 2019, Lori moves to Rexburg. She meets very briefly with her son Colby to say goodbye, and Tylee is visibly upset. last time he ever saw his sister and brother alive. Lori does enroll JJ in school, which I found interesting because that does kind of imply that maybe he died sooner than they were planning. But at this point, he's also considered very dark. I think 6 is the highest or lowest you can get on the light and dark scales that Chad made up, and JJ was suddenly 4.31 dark. A few days later, they go to Yellowstone. Alex and Lori take Tylee and JJ. They spend most of the day at Yellowstone, specifically the Old Faithful area, and they get home around 8:37 p.m. And that is the last time we know that of where Tylee's phone was, where she was at 8:37 p.m. at the townhouse apartment in Rexburg. On that same day, Chad has Tammy increase her life insurance to the maximum, a portent of things to come. Between about 2 and 4 a.m., Alex is suddenly located. This is all digital evidence. You can see that in one of my other videos. That Alex is at Lori's apartment for a couple of hours, and he goes back to his own. This is the middle of the night. Around 9 a.m., Alex leaves his apartment and ends up driving to Chad's place, where he remains for a couple of hours when Tylee's body was being buried on the property. Possibly burned. We're not sure where she was burned or whatnot, but yeah. Minutes after Alex leaves the property, Chad sent the famous raccoon text to Tammy saying that, oh, I just saw a raccoon and shot it and burned the bunch of limbs in the fire pit and then buried the raccoon in our pet cemetery. And of course, that was actually where Tylee's remains were recovered. In September, still on the 18th, Chad gets a burner phone, and then the next day it begins the weekend we've heard so much about, where Melanie Gibb and David Warwick, who were dating at the time and apparently married to other people at the time, so that's cute, they came over to visit Lori. They stay at her townhouse. They record a podcast. That's when they went to go look at some real estate property, yada yada. Chad takes JJ upstairs to discipline him and comes down later with scratches on his neck from JJ. So that's disturbing. On September 22nd is the last time we see JJ alive. There's a picture of him taken in his little red pajamas on the couch. And the last time he is seen alive last time he is seen is Melanie Gibbs says that she saw Alex carrying JJ up the stairs. She thought he was asleep. Maybe he was, maybe he was not. He was found in those same pajamas. And I won't go into the state of his body and how he was killed, but it's tragic and horrifying. And then the next morning, however, David goes, well, where's JJ? And Lori goes, oh, he was acting crazy. He was climbing on the fridge. He knocked over a picture of Jesus, which, of course, she had to interpret as he was evil, although it sounds like he didn't do any of those things because JJ had already died at this point. She says, oh, he was acting out, so Alex has him. Alex took him, which is true to a point. Alex did take his body, and yeah. The next day, Lori contacts the babysitter, who had only come once to take care of JJ, and say, well, he's going to be out of town for a while visiting his grandmother, so you won't need to come. And she also contacts the school saying he's not going to be in for a while. And then Alex is on the Daybell property only for about 17 minutes, which so isn't a ton of time, but it is enough time to bury a small child, especially if the grave was already dug, which it very well could be. It wasn't very deep. We know that much. Brandon, then, going back down to Arizona, Brandon, who is niece of Melanie's husband at this point. They're going through this horrible contentious divorce. Melanie will not talk to him except via text or only to do things like figuring out dropping off kids and that kind of thing. But he rents a house in the same basic neighborhood as the kids went to school so that the kids could have some continuity. And nobody knows he lives there except for a couple of neighbors and Melanie. And then he turns the corner and is shot at from Tylee's Jeep by Alex. Fortunately, the bullet is lodged into the frame of his car and he tears off and calls the police, and they eventually, this helps them to track down Lori and all of that, because they track the Jeep from Arizona through Utah to Idaho, and then they get a warrant on the Jeep, and that helps to expedite things as far as realizing that the children are missing and that Brandon's attempted shooting is connected to this whole case. At the same time, Lori is now ordering wedding rings on Amazon through Charles's account and has having them delivered to Rexburg. Now, his sister Kay, again, JJ's biological grandmother, has access to his accounts because she's done accounting and other things for Charles's businesses in the past. So she logs on to the Amazon account and sees the Rexburg address. And so that's when she first gets the idea of that's where Lori has probably gone, especially when she sees that, oh, she is now ordering wedding rings. Keep in mind, Tammy is still alive at this point. So that's not at all creepy. Conveniently, October 5th, Chad texts Lori that a demon has entered Tammy named Viola. And that as soon as he gets confirmation, even though he's already got spiritual confirmation, he doesn't want to wait for removal, which would mean getting rid of the demon, which means in his parlance, Tammy will die. Because in their belief system, as Zulema explained in her testimony, if a demon gets into a body, it's because the spirit has already, owns the body, the spirit has already left, a demon slips in, and then the spirit that owns the body is stuck in limbo. Unless you get the demon out, and then the body can die, and then the spirit can go on. That's not at all what the LDS beliefs are, but that is that's their crazy belief. So essentially, as soon as this Viola demon is gotten rid of, then Tammy will officially be dead, and they can get married. On October 9th, Alex gets a burner phone. It has activity between 5:30 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. I think Alex may have gotten the burner phone the day before, but he activates it on the 9th. And there's some failed phone calls, but there are at least 10 text message exchanges between him and Chad's phone during the period where Tammy is shot at. Alex practices at a gun range for some hours, and then he buys some dark clothing at Sportsman's Warehouse, uses cash to do that, and around 9:30 p.m. he tries to shoot Tammy. The gun fails and he runs off. People then start to assume, especially Chad, convinces her it was a paintball gun, not a real gun. And my theory is that Alex was actually he was planning on shooting her from a longer distance, thinking she would come to the back of the house. There's two driveways, one in the front and the one that goes to the backyard. You can see that in my other video about the maps. So I think he was practicing for 50 to 100 yards, and then she went to the wrong, quote unquote, the wrong driveway, and then he went around the house, and then the gun misfired. Again, that video explains some of that as well. On the 17th, Alex's phone is tracked driving down to Hurricane, Utah with Lori. They spend the night at a hotel. He drops her off at the airport and then spends the entire day driving back. 12 hours. It's a 9-hour drive-ish, but then you factor in food breaks, gas breaks, bathroom breaks. It takes him 12 hours. He gets home around 2 a.m. That evening of the 18th, Alex's phone is suddenly at a chapel that's near the Daybell residence. Alex's phone is tracked for 38 minutes in the parking lot of that chapel, and suddenly data on his phone for the first time goes dark. And when it comes back on, it's moving at like a fast rate of speed, as if it's like on a freeway or a highway, and it's about a 7-minute drive south of the Daybell property. So we have an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, where Alex is in the vicinity of the Daybell residence nearby, and that is likely when Tammy was killed in that interval. Helping Chad. Tammy died of asphyxia. And it sounds like she was restrained. I know some people have wondered if she was killed outside and then brought inside, and it's hinted at when Garth calls 911 and says he found her frozen on the ground, or at least frozen, that she was very, very cold that way, not just cold from the body cooling, but actually from the outside. Or perhaps was she killed in the cozy cone, the little addition to the house, because it didn't have central heating. It probably had a space heater is my guess, but if it wasn't on and Tammy died there, then her body could have cooled much more quickly as well. Regardless, we don't know exactly where she died, just that she was then found in her bedroom by Garth now. We know that. And it sounds like they had to make up the story about her falling out of bed, which makes no sense, we know, because dead bodies don't fall out of bed. That doesn't happen. About 1 a.m., Garth comes home from work from the haunted mill, finds his mother deceased, cold and blue. He tells one of his coworkers as much, although he then later changes his story when Chad comes into the picture. He told his friend McKay Beglin at work that he found his mother and he had no idea where his dad was. He couldn't find him. So that completely debunks the whole story of my dad and I just found my mom, or that Chad woke up next to his wife. Chad actually had described on an online forum, the Avow forum, which is part of the creepy culty thing, but that his wife, he woke up to find his wife deceased with a smile on her face. I'm like, no, she had foam coming out of her mouth and you killed her. And it doesn't sound like he was even in the same bed. So lies upon lies upon lies. So they call 911 around 6 a.m. Garth starts the call and then he's stuttering and stumbling, and then Chad quickly takes it over and plays, the sad grieving husband. A brand new coroner shows up. This is like her fifth or sixth unattended death ever, and in Idaho, the coroner system, you don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to have any medical training whatsoever. It is an elected position. So because there wasn't any overt signs of massive violence or stabbings or bullet wounds or anything like that, there's no breaking and entering, there's no holes in the walls, whatever, that, maybe I guess it just was natural causes. And if there was going to be an autopsy, Chad would have had to pay for it. And do you think he was going to do that? Not on your life. So no autopsy was necessary. If this had happened in Utah, where they lived before, an autopsy would have been required by law. But alas, that didn't happen. So this is early on a Saturday morning, and Chad wants to have the funeral on Monday. There are all kinds of issues with that, not the least of which is getting a body embalmed so that you can transfer across state lines, but also planning a funeral and getting family in town and posting an obituary all over the weekend. And so that doesn't work. They finally do it on a Tuesday. But there's red flags all over the place, but nothing that you can concretely point to and blame things for. On November 1st, that is when the Gilbert police have reached out to the Rexburg police and said, hey, do you have this Jeep we're looking for that was involved in this attempted murder? They find it. They do a search warrant on that. A couple of days later, Chad and Lori fly to Hawaii. And then over the next couple of days, they get a marriage license, get married on the beach. And while they're in Hawaii, they go visit one of the LDS temples. That's disgusting to me. Then, I have put an E at the end of that. That's the wrong Melanie, so take the E off of that. Melanie, then Boudreaux, is arrested in Utah for trespassing on her former in-law's home. Her ex-husband, Brandon, having just been shot at recently and is fearful for his life, is hiding out, understandably. She tracks him down and 2 days in a row starts banging on the doors, and finally, second day, her ex-father-in-law calls the police. She is arrested for trespassing that's enhanced by domestic violence charges. Alex bails her out. Then on the 25th, Gilbert police call Rexburg police from Arizona to Idaho after Kay Woodcock, grandma, who is in Louisiana, has been calling them saying, I can't get hold of my grandson. I don't know where he is. Would you please do a welfare check? I have not been able to talk to my grandson since late August. I haven't seen him, talk to him, anything, and I'm very concerned. And I think they're in Rexburg at this address. They do the welfare check the very next day. Now, at this point, no one realizes that Ty Lee has not been seen since September either. Earlier since September than JJ. Police finally do a welfare check. They go to the townhouse area where Alex and Lori both have apartments, and they see Alex and Chad outside. At this point, Chad pretends to not even know who Lori is, even though they've been married for a couple of weeks already. Yeah, I don't have her number. I don't know anything. At one point, he drives off. The police stop him, and he finally admits, yeah, I do know her. This is her number. In the same situation, Alex claims that JJ's in Louisiana visiting Kay, and they say, well, psych, actually, it was Kay who called us to do the welfare check. We know he's not with Kay. Eventually, they have a conversation with Lori. They've had a couple, though. At this point, they actually showed some body cam of this one, whereas in Lori's trial, we only had the audio. But Lori says that JJ is in Arizona with her friend Melanie Gibb. And then Lori and Chad call Melanie Gibb and say, don't talk to the police. And Melanie doesn't know what to think at this point. She's kind of freaking out. Chad and Lori flee the state. We know now they went to Knott's Berry Farm with some of Chad's kids. And then from there, eventually they went to Hawaii. But at this point, they didn't know where they were. Shortly after this is when we have Melanie Gibb calling them and recording her conversation, because she's like, you guys aren't, why did you make me or tell me to lie to police about where JJ was, saying that he was with me when he wasn't? And she starts then calling Lori Corihor, which there's a video about that. I'll link to that as well. There's a whole lot more than just saying you're the Antichrist. It's a whole messier ball of wax and more interesting, I think. On the 27th, the police also serve warrants on Lori's and Alex's apartments. Both are empty of personal belongings. They have fled, of course, but the furniture's there. And they're like, oh, you guys took off pretty quickly here. They also serve a search warrant on Lori's storage unit. And they find photo albums, JJ's bike. I think they found some things about that belong to JJ's dog as well, which has, of course, been given away or sold. A couple of days after that, Alex goes to Vegas and marries Zulema because Chad told them to. There's some scary stuff about that. You can hear from I can go into Zulema and their freaky honeymoon situation if you're interested. On the 30th, also in Vegas, niece Melanie marries Ian Pulowski, who she has only known for a matter of days. And then a day or so after the wedding, Ian starts seeing some scary things, hears about Lori and the missing children, and hears some of their weird doctrinal and spiritual beliefs, and is suddenly very scared for his children and ex-wife, understandably. And he goes to the police and agrees to wear a wire for the FBI. And he records over the next several weeks about 9 conversations with Chad and Lori, some of which were played in court, which were fascinating and disturbing, as you can imagine. Ian is still married to Melanie, and they have a kid together. I do not understand. That fact just boggles the mind. December 1st, they fly to Hawaii after the Knott's Berry Farm trip, and this is when, a couple days after that, Melanie Gibb tells the Rexburg police that, yeah, they told me to lie. She kind of finally comes clean with all of that. On December 11th, now this is not even 2 weeks since Alex and Zulema are married, Tammy's body is exhumed for autopsy in Utah. Interestingly enough, Chad finds out about it, and we're pretty sure it's because he used to work at the cemetery in Utah where Tammy was buried. And so his friends were like, at the cemetery, his colleagues, former friends were like, oh, that's weird. Why are they exhuming your wife's body? So they just gave him a call and asked, he's doing what now? So that's probably how he found out. So same day, Alex takes a day trip to Mexico, possibly to buy drugs. So Alex, at this point, he's in Arizona, so it's not as big of a drive because once his work was done in Rexburg and he married Zulema, he wanted to be done with Rexburg. But the very next day, he drops dead. Autopsy said it was a pulmonary embolism, natural causes, case closed. The timing is super suspicious. Alex has started to think that maybe zombies weren't a thing, maybe he was a murderer, maybe Chad and Lori were making him the fall guy for their horrible desires. And so some people think he did it to himself somehow, other people think that Chad and Lori found a way to get rid of him quickly because he was starting to question. We don't know. Yeah, Chad makes sure that Alex is cremated, and I have no doubt that is because they didn't want a second autopsy or any further investigation, because if he had only cremated Tammy, then she couldn't have been exhumed. Now, just a note, In Latter-day Saint culture, it's very unusual to be cremated. It's not like against beliefs by any stretch, but it's just very, very uncommon. Culturally, it's almost everyone is embalmed and buried. So it's very unusual that suddenly Chad goes from embalming his wife to cremating his brother-in-law. That to me, that is suspicious, the sudden change there. On December 20th, the Rexburg police and the FBI finally make a public statement asking for people's help in finding the missing children. And this is when a lot of people finally went, oh, maybe something is wrong here, and not just that Chad moved on from Tammy's natural death so quickly. January 3rd, they are still missing. No one can get hold of them. Emma testified that the police lied, that they knew how to get hold of her dad. The reality was they had phone numbers, but Chad wasn't answering, and they couldn't get hold of him, and they didn't know for sure where he was. But they conducted a search warrant on the Daybell property. This is the dead of winter in January. This is where Emma sticks her tongue out at the camera when there's a journalist covering the story. Real classy. On the 7th, Melanie Pulaski had made an appointment with the FBI saying, okay, fine, I'll come forward and tell you what I know. But then she doesn't show for her appointment. On the 16th of January, this is 2020, the Idaho court orders Lori to produce her children in 5 days or risk being arrested. It takes them a little more than 5 days, but eventually she is served with child protection papers in Hawaii. The Hawaii police serve a warrant on their rental car, on their rental condo, where they find the children's birth certificates, JJ's iPad, a whole bunch of copies of Charles's death certificates and whatnot. She is finally arrested on February 20th, so they gave her weeks rather than just those 5 days, and her bond is $5 million. Chad is in a panic, trying to raise that money from friends, from neighbors, and congregation members. Nobody, fortunately, puts their mortgage, their house up for collateral. But Lori's first day in Idaho court is March 6th. They have finally on June 9th, 2020, there is a search warrant for the Daybell property, and that's with the help of the FBI evidence response team. And that's when JJ's and Tylee's remains are recovered. JJ's from the dry pond area and Tylee's from near the fire pit. JJ's body was intact. Horrifically, you know how he died from suffocation. And then Tylee's remains were burned and unrecognizable, and he had to do dental records and DNA testing to confirm. Her DNA was also found on some tools in Chad's shed. At that point, after they found JJ's remains, but before they found Tylee's, Chad tries to flee in his car, but he's stopped by police. Pryor tried to make it sound like he wasn't fleeing, but even on the camera recording of Emma talking to her dad when he's in a patrol car and cuffed, she says, after they chased you down just now. So he was trying to flee, and she knew it. He's arrested. At that point, he wasn't arrested. He was in cuffs being detained, but he wasn't officially arrested until a little bit later that day. May of 2021, these are the official charges that Chad and Lori got. First-degree murder they both got for Tylee and JJ. Chad got first-degree murder of Tammy, whereas Lori just got conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Tammy. And Chad also got conspiracy to commit the murders of Tylee and JJ, as well as insurance fraud for trying to get Tammy's life insurance money and having it up right before he killed her. And then Lori was charged with grand theft by deception because of all the Social Security benefits she was getting from Tylee, as well as then Charles's death, and also from JJ's benefits from Charles's death as well. So continued. So later in May of 2021, so this is a year after her initial arrest, but the same month as her charges, Lori is found incompetent to stand trial. That was upsetting to a lot of people, but the fact is she probably has been pretty delusional. About the same time in Arizona, Lori is charged with attempted conspiracy of first-degree murder in the death of Charles. And then following April, Lori is declared competent to stand trial, and she is charged with the attempted murder of Brendan Boudreaux. Then we follow about another almost a year later, March of 2023, Chad waives his right to a speedy trial so that you can have more time to prepare for trial. But then that means, since Lori did not waive her right to a speedy trial, that the two cases had to be severed and would be tried separately. April 1st of 2023 is when Lori's trial began in Ada County, Idaho. It was moved from Fremont County because of concerns about finding an impartial jury. Lori's trial lasted about 6 weeks, and she was found guilty on all counts after about a day and a half of deliberation, and she was sentenced in July of 2023 to 3 consecutive life sentences. And I believe she was supposed to do some reparations for the theft, but that may never be repaid. Who knows? In November, she was extradited to Arizona for the charges that she is facing there. And then we are now in 2024. April 1st, exactly a year after Lori's trial began, Chad's trial began with jury selection, just as hers did on April 1st of 2023. So we are not done yet, though. On May 20th, the state rested their case. On the 23rd, the defense rested their case, and the state began the rebuttal case. Going to interrupt real briefly to say, please like and subscribe. Click the notification bell so that you don't miss a single video. Really appreciate it. It helps with the algorithm and people to find us and learn more about the case and all that good stuff. One question: life in prison or the death penalty? That is the only question that they will be discussing, and it has to be a unanimous verdict if it's going to be the death penalty. If it's not unanimous, it is automatically life in prison. Now, in Idaho, in order to have the death penalty, it has to meet some certain criteria. There's certain things that automatically make it a capital case. If it's a police officer who is murdered, automatically a capital case. But there have to be more intense circumstances than his, I want to say simple murder, but for it to be a death penalty case, it has to be more aggravated on some level. So multiple victims, check. And if it's children or a more vulnerable person, check. If it's a more heinous and cruel crime, then just say. So Charles's death, as horrific as the fact that he was murdered was, it was quick, essentially. But for Tylee and JJ, it was probably torturous. And so all of those things added together make it eligible for the death penalty in Idaho. It's interesting to think that we could have a verdict, not just a verdict, but the penalty very quickly, because in Lori's case, after we had the guilty verdict, it took 2 months. They had to have all kinds of reports sent in, and the judge had to deliberate, and he was the one who then had to decide on the punishment for Lori, and it took a good 2 months. With Chad, it is up to the jury, and I don't imagine it will take 2 months for the jury to come to whatever conclusion they come to. Here's the thing. When it comes to the death penalty, I'm not a fan of actually executing people. Not the least of which reasons is because that's violating human rights. The U.S. is one of the only countries considered the developed world that still does the death penalty. It's considered a human rights violation on almost every other level. But on top of that, it doesn't seem wise. In the case of Chad, it's clearly he's guilty, but we have also clearly put to death people who are innocent. And there are people who are constantly coming forward that we learn with new technologies are innocent. In a big picture, I'd like the death penalty to exist as a possibility. In many cases, we don't have answers for the victims' families. And I don't want to say closure, because that doesn't really exist. But for people who, like family members who don't even know where their loved one's body might be, or what happened, or what those kinds of situations, sometimes having the death penalty as a bargaining chip has allowed families to get those answers. Prosecutors can say, if you are honest about X, Y, and Z, if you lead us to the body, we will take off the death penalty. And then the person is willing to give up that information, and they would not have had otherwise. I think that is a reason to have it available, not necessarily to use, but as a bargaining chip. The other thing that I kind of like it for is, take this off now, forget to do that. In the US, because the death penalty is such a big deal, as it should not be taken lightly, we don't want to accidentally put someone to death that shouldn't be. So there are appeals upon appeals upon appeals, automatic appeals. So someone is given that as their sentence, automatic appeals. And there are so many appeals, and they can go on literally for decades. So most people who are given the death penalty end up dying on death row. They never actually get executed. And there have been stays on executions for years at a time throughout the US for different reasons. So a lot of people, the majority of people given the death penalty don't actually die of execution. But also, most of them, death row is solitary confinement. So it is a harsher punishment just in the life. So I like that part. The idea that if Chad is given the death penalty, I don't necessarily care if he's executed. I like the idea that maybe he will spend decades in solitary confinement. I like that. I like the idea of him. That's a punishment to me. That's a punishment. Although if he's in the general prison population, he could be in danger, because I understand that people who hurt children are not usually safe even in prison. So who knows? We shall see. Heavy stuff, but I am hopeful. I am hopeful that justice will be served. And when that happens, I have a big, huge helping of Rocky Road ice cream to celebrate.